Greetings! I am Herbert Erpaderp, and would you look at the time? That's right, it's please insert local time here. That means it's time for Ask a Herbert Erpaderp, where I, Herbert Erpaderp, shall answer questions and respond to comments from you, people who are not, thankfully, Herbert Erpaderp. At the time of recording this, I have no idea what I'll be using as a background video, so whatever it is, I'm sure it's fantastic. Or at least okay. It's better than a plain black screen. Maybe. Before the questions, I have something I would like to share, or at least tell you about. I can't really share it because I would probably be violating copyright. The other day, Neil Cicierega released a new album called Mouth Moods. Some of you may already be familiar with this or some of his previous works like Mouth Sounds and Mouth Silence. For those who aren't familiar, he does mashups, which is probably not of interest to a lot of you, but I think they're quite funny, and he's actually pretty good at what he does. Some of the songs he's mashed together actually work really well. I think my favourite tracks are Tiger, ACVC, and Annoyed Grunt. Wow Wow is pretty cool too. Actually, the whole album is pretty fun. I'm easily amused and enjoy funny music quite a lot. Your tastes may of course vary, but I think you should check it out. I'll include a link in the description. The album is free, so go and check it out if you think you might like it. If you do check it out, let me know what you think, good or bad, in the comments section below. Onwards to the questions and answers. Toa Duncanuva says, who needs drugs when Herbert is already a drug that I use? Anyway, if you're playing War Thunder, you may run into me playing from PS4. Now, where is that Black Panther? I'm not a drug. It is definitely not recommended to smoke, inject, snort, or in any way attempt to ingest Herberts. It's really bad for your health, and I have no idea where the Black Panther is. I prefer Pink Panthers. Khalid Fadlan H says, search a pink user skin in the War Thunder camouflages and apply it to all German tanks. By the way, I have a Hetzer though. I didn't know that was a thing that existed. Is it something that everyone can see, or is it just visible on my end? I would prefer my fantastic pink tanks to be visible to all, so everybody can enjoy their glory. X-Wing Pro says, for bolt action, what should I get first alongside second starter to play nicely with my friends? I was planning to get a mortar or MG teams for both sides, but I don't know. Do you play X-Wing miniatures game? I suggest you give it a try. Do you really want to play nicely with your friends? Surely you want to crush them beneath your boots. Maybe not. I don't really have a good answer. I think machine guns are good. I like them more than mortars, but then I don't really have a lot of experience with mortars. Maybe they're great. I would be more likely to suggest a vehicle of some kind. A tank is always fun of course, but if you don't want a tank, maybe a transport. They can usually be equipped with machine guns and you'll probably find them to be quite useful. Of course, the starter set does come with a transport for the Germans, so maybe a mortar team or a machine gun team for them would be good, or a tank. I'm pretty sure the starter set allows you to build a light machine gun team for both sides, but you could always designate some regular infantry to be MG teams or mortar teams anyway, even if they're not modelled as such. I think a transport would give you some flexibility. Personally, I'm a fan of the buy everything you might need and just have it on hand anyway kind of thing. I've never played the X-Wing miniatures game, and I would be more interested in the very similar Star Trek game, just because I like Star Trek a little bit more than Star Wars. I've always been a little tempted by both games, but the miniatures do come pre-assembled and painted, so I wouldn't get to build or paint anything, which is my favourite part of the hobby. I know I could repaint them, but it just doesn't seem quite the same. I might still pick them up one day though. Gustav 2 Adolf says, wait, does your fish live in a tank? Why don't you call him Michael Fishman instead? It took me a second to get that. Michael Fishman instead of Michael Wittmann. I'd like to say I just didn't think of it, but the truth is the fish is a mighty Klingon warrior. He told me what his name was, and he let me know in no uncertain terms that his name was General Martok and he would accept nothing else. I was scared, so I agreed. Potato Inc. says, Proserpina? Yep, the episode was number 26, so I named it after asteroid 26 Proserpina, which is a main belt asteroid and was obviously named after the Roman goddess. I like to try coming up with names for Ask a Herbert Erpaderp somewhat related to the number of the episode. Sometimes it's a bit of a stretch. Jacob says, when do you plan on uploading your US team painting video? I'm not entirely sure what team you're referring to. The next US thing I'll be uploading is my Flames of War Pershings, which I am working on. If you're referring to my US bolt action infantry, I don't know, one day? The usual answer to when I plan to upload something is when it's done. I don't usually hold completed videos in reserve or anything like that, so when it's rendered and finished, it's usually uploaded pretty quickly after that. Top Bunk Productions says, how long has it been since you played the KV2 or made any KV2 related things? Where's the derp in Herbert Erpaderp gone? The other day I made a purchase that I think you're going to like. Anyway, the derp is in your heart. You don't have to play a KV2 to have the derp within you. I have played the KV2 in World of Tanks recently. It wasn't really worth showing, but maybe I'll play some more and make a video about it. It really is a fun tank. Martin Strickfus says, Herbert, you sound really Australian when you say Australia. What is your favourite Eve ship? If patrons wanted to, how could we buy you a specific interesting kit? I don't know, the proper Australian way to say Australia is Straya, but I prefer the way I say it. My favourite Eve ship? Good question. I always had a thing for the Drake. It wasn't a great ship by any stretch, but it was fun and it just looks so weird. I also really enjoyed stealth bombers. My main character was well skilled with Caldari and Amar ships, so I could fly the stealth bomber for both of those races. I've forgotten what they were called, but I liked them both quite a lot. If you have a good FC, and people that aren't completely brain dead, you can absolutely ruin shit with stealth bombers. Either as a little wolf pack hot-dropping people using torpedoes, or actually using the bombs as a part of a larger fleet. Or at least that was the case when I played. They were also quite useful for easily getting around and doing space logistics stuff. I used to play with Test Alliance when we were in Fountain and Delve, and I did a lot of logistics stuff, and for that I used both stealth bombers and the Crane, which is the Caldari cloaky transport ship. You need to be sneaky and cloaky if you're doing logistics. Not the kind where you haul cargo or repair ships in battle, but the logistics where you maintain the star bases and jump bridges and stuff like that. It wasn't usually thrilling, but I kind of enjoyed it. I still remember back in my day. One time I had followed a fleet knocking down an enemy starbase, and I was meant to drop one of our own to replace it. I decloaked and dropped it, but I wasn't quick enough in anchoring it, and some dirty goon managed to anchor it himself before me, so that had to be destroyed and replaced again. It was successful the second time. It was pretty funny. Some people were a little bit mad, but most of us thought it was pretty funny. About sending me kits. I don't really know. It somehow doesn't quite feel right to be taking kits from people. I'd much rather you kept them and got enjoyment from them yourselves. I do have a whole bunch of stuff of my own that's been waiting for ages to get built, and other than shiny new releases, I probably shouldn't really be adding to that pile. Though if you really want to send me something unique or interesting, get in touch with me on Patreon and I could give you an address. Really, your support on Patreon is enough though. Bo Roberts says, what was your favourite tank to paint so far? Also, do you plan on playing or making any videos for Flames of War 4th edition when that comes out? So far, I don't know. To be honest, I had a lot of fun painting the Pink Panther. It's not specifically a tank, but I got a lot of satisfaction from the bolt action Bren carriers when I finished painting those. I plan to do a battle report for the 4th edition of Flames of War when it comes out. I might also do something about the book, and if there's a new starter set, I might pick that up too. Of course, depending on what comes in it. And of course, I'll do videos on regular Flames of War models when I get them. I have actually ordered some new Flames of War kits. The Plastic Tigers and M10 tank destroyers. There's a poll over on Patreon right now to help me decide which of those I build first. So if any patrons don't know about that, you should head on over there and vote. If you're not a patron, maybe you would like to become one and go vote. Nudge nudge, go on, you know you want to. Australia Day was last week, and I celebrated with 2 videos about the Australian AC-1 Sentinel tank. The first of which was a World of Tanks video, and the following comments are from that video. As always, link in the description and in the upper right corner. Bob Bobbing Along says, that accent is so thick I can't understand it. I see what you did there. Matthias Kellerman says, I suspect you would become a sensation if you used the coarse voice all the time. What is a Darrow and Bogan? Edit, I just watched some Bogans. Unpleasant. They are clearly Australia's version of white trash. I like the way you typed Bogan the first time. It makes me think of an alien species in Star Trek or something like that. The Bahogan. Bahogan's off the port bow, Captain. Fire the torpedoes. A Darrow is someone really trashy, I guess. I think it comes from the word derelict, and it is true, Bogans are really unpleasant. Of course, not everybody that sounds like the voices I was doing is a Bogan, and you shouldn't judge somebody by the way they happen to sound when they talk. Kind of like how not everybody with a southern redneck sounding voice is stupid. But Bogans generally are pretty bad people, definitely our version of white trash. Just as racist, sexist, and unintelligent as your stereotypical hick or chav. I'm not sure I would be a sensation if I always did the Bogan voice. I do think it's funny, but it's not really sustainable for me. Eventually, it starts hurting. Top Bunk Productions says, sounds almost like Yorkshire chavs. You fucking say that again, you gay fucker, I'll shank you right hard like. Was that not a great chav voice, but, you know, good enough, I guess. They're pretty much the same thing, just with small regional differences. They're fun to laugh about, not so much fun to spend time with. Gustav 2 Adolf says, Oi Herbert, I grew up playing a game called Ty the Tasmanian Tiger. That alliteration. Back in the early 2000s, being a non-native English speaker, I learnt much of my English from that game, in which everyone spoke Aussie, and subsequently it was my major source of learning how to speak the English language, as well as about the Australian culture, mainly boomerangs, boonie hats, and the word mate. Thank goodness it wasn't a mature game, else I'd have said wanker and fucking cassowary mate during English lessons. I've never heard of the game, but then it doesn't really sound like something I would be into at the time, since I was in high school in the early 2000s. It is interesting though. Anyone that says you can't learn from video games is a fucking wanker. It would be kind of funny to hear a little kid yelling about wankers and fucking cassowaries. Your teachers probably wouldn't have thought so though, so maybe it is a good thing. Also, until now, I had no idea what a boonie hat was. I'm not very good at being an Aussie. I also never really use the word mate. It feels awkward and sounds sarcastic when I say it. The second Australia Day video was also about the AC-1 Sentinel, this time in 28mm scale. Seahorn Actual says, well, happy Australia Day, Herbert. Now how do you store all these models you put together? I'm just going to drop in a clip from a previous video here where I showed some of the boxes and shelves I store my tanks in. Since most of the models I build are tanks, this is enough. I've also got a couple of bags for bolt action and Flames of War stuff where my painted infantry goes. I'd love to get some nice fancy glass display cabinets, but I don't really have the space for that kind of thing anyway. Potato Inc says he was staying inside on Australia Day because it's bloody hot outside. Also, I would love to see a Chindit / Australian Army. Kraken 110 would also like to see a bolt action Australian Army. That could be pretty much every day. It's way too hot all the time, except the week or two that we get of winter. I've actually been thinking that I might get a handful of Australian infantry figures. It wouldn't be an entire army, but I could have an Australian command team and a few other models, and mix them with British figures to fill out the force. That way I could field a semi-believable Australian army if I felt like it. John Padula says, well, the music in the beginning is okay, but the US anthem is much more patriotic. I can't tell if you're taking the piss or not. Using the United States anthem in an Australia Day video about an Australian tank made by an Australian would be totally patriotic. Matthias Kellerman says, interesting, the vehicle is probably the company B casting. That would go a long way toward explaining the patchy quality of the kit. After looking at their Stug 33B, I would say you were lucky that the kit was so user-friendly. When you paint it, are you going to render the microphallus purple? You know, I think you're right. Until now, I had not heard of Company B, but the picture on their website is exactly the same as the one on War and Peace Games' website. Interesting. If the rest of their stuff is bad, then maybe I should feel lucky that the model I got wasn't bad. I am quite tempted to paint the dong flesh-coloured. A discussion with my friend the other day got me a little bit tempted to use some green stuff to make the phallus a little bit less nub-like. I probably won't, but it's a funny idea. As for the colour, I'm undecided. I guess we'll wait and see how I feel when I actually paint the model. John Smith says, "This is a really weird looking tank. I assume this is also dangerous because it is Australian in origin." It is odd looking, that's what I like about it. It's unusual. I do kind of have a thing for strange, unusual looking tanks. It is definitely dangerous. It doesn't have a very big gun, that's not the dangerous part. Its incredibly toxic venom is what's going to kill you. Just don't let it bite you and you should be fine. Like most of Australia's deadly wildlife, if you leave it alone, it'll probably leave you alone. Probably. Gustav II Adolf says, "The German word for fat is dick," which is moderately amusing. Not that it's related to this tank though. Wait a minute. I knew that. I learned it when I heard of the Dickermax tank destroyer, which is a very sensible name. T says, "Australia is cool. I once watched a documentary about Australia. I like how you drive around in old, wrecked cars and trucks that spew flames and have been fitted with spikes. I also love the post-apocalyptic paint job you give all your cars. Living in the middle of the desert seems awkward though. When will you get around to painting the rat? Also, what sort of superglue do you use? It looks like it has a brush applicator, which is useful." Yeah, the desert is pretty inhospitable, but we need the space for our cars and trucks. If you drive them too near the trees along the coast, all the spikes and stuff gets knocked off, and then you have to go to the effort of putting them back on. Nobody wants that extra work, so we live in the desert. I'm not sure when I'll paint the rat. I do have a goal on Patreon to paint it, and to be fair, that is a fairly expensive one, but it would force me to paint it. But one day I'll probably just be in the mood and start on it anyway. The superglue I've been using lately is Selleys Quick Fix. It does come in a bottle with a little brush applicator. I'm not attached to that particular brand, but I do like superglue that has a brush. I usually just get whichever of that sort of glue is cheapest in the supermarket. It's cheaper than modelling specific brands of superglue, and I found it to work just as well. On Friday, I put up a quick tips video in which I demonstrated some methods I use for holding onto models while I paint them, and the following comments are from that video. Surfing Moose says, "I use the smaller Tamiya bottles, the ones that look like larger tester bottles with blue tack. Also, I do sub-assembly painting. I rarely, if ever, attach the tracks on tanks until they have been base painted. Once the hull and tracks have been painted separately, scratch off some paint and attach using crazy glue. Now the weathering can start." I think sub-assembly painting is a good idea, particularly if you plan to paint the tank immediately after building it. A lot of my Flames of War tanks were painted that way. It doesn't usually work so well for me though. It can be months or years before I paint something I've built, and you can't really play games with them if they're in pieces. So I usually attach the tracks to my tanks. Both ways are good though. Sub-assembly painting can make things go a lot quicker and easier. Alex Kinchin says, "For plastic tanks, I just glue a bit of sprue to the bottom. It means it won't sit flat without some fiddling, but you can paint the bottom with ease." That's actually a really good idea. The bond should be pretty good with the sprue being the same material as the model. You could always blue tack it to something or directly to the table if you want it to sit kind of flat. Maybe sharpen the end of the sprue and stab it into a block of foam if you've got a bunch of parts that need to be held. I think that's a good idea. Gustav II Adolf says, "You can hurt yourself, or worse, the model. That's how one should prioritize. Herbert is an expert. Trust him." Yes, trust him. He also adds, "I use toothpicks with a bit of blue tack for the separate smaller parts such as wheels and antennas, but I tend to build 35th scale models and thus have many small parts." You should definitely trust me. I mean, your body can heal, but if you damage the model, then you have to fix it. Nobody wants to do that extra work. Toothpicks for small parts is a good idea. I do similar for things like wheels on larger scale tanks, except I use barbecue skewers. They're kind of like toothpicks, but longer and slightly thicker. I probably should have thought to mention those. Neobrag says, "Well, I don't exactly know what this gesture is called, but it makes me chuckle. What is it called? Sex fingers? Suggestive in-out fingers? I want to know so that I can describe it in future." On Monday, I uploaded some Verdun gameplay, and the following comments are from that video. British Modeler says, "Actually, your Scottish accent wasn't so bad. It sounded like a person from the Isle of Arran, off the west coast. And Top Bunk Productions added, I'm a quarter Scottish, so I can confirm that your accent's okay. You mean I don't win the worst accent award? God damn it, I never win anything. Well, I guess that's okay. I used to work with Scottish people, maybe that's rubbed off on me in some way. They were always amused by my terrible attempts to emulate them. Gmas Briada says, oh, he werfed a mine at me. I'm German and I cannot take this damage on my language. Triggered. Oh ja, das Boot und ein Glockenspiel. Guten Morgen haben Sie verstärkte Ohrverschlung. How's that for damaging the German language? The very end bit is me trying to ask if you have intensified triggering. It amused me at least anyway. And now for some comments on the most recent episode of Derptopia. Matthias Kellerman says, Herbert, your high-density residential areas with no utilities are reminiscent of Soviet paradise of the 30s. Are you a closet Stalinist? Top Bunk Productions adds, he's one nuclear power station away from making it into a derp noble. A closet Stalinist? Niet, comrade, niet. No utilities, no problems. Don't even worry about it. I can't wait to get a nuclear plant. It will finally put Derptopia on the map once and for all. Top Bunk Productions says, now you have to face the challenge many mayors face. A populace consisting mostly of idiots. It really is a challenge. I had thought my life experiences of seemingly being surrounded by idiots would help, but it doesn't. It really doesn't. Mayoring is hard work. I guess if people get too bad, I can always break out the old bulldozer and show them what for. Seahorn Actual says, I'm enjoying this series more than I should. Must resist buying the game. Must resist buying the game. Must adult things. Must buy game. Buying game. Well, your powers of resistance may have failed, but I hope you're at least enjoying the game. I quite enjoy it, obviously. Gustav 2 Adolf says, howdy Herbert, mighty fine vidya about Utopia there. You ever tried Fistful of Frags? It's one hell of a cowboy game, real wacky. You can kick people, shoot them to death, drink whiskey and throw your gun at them when you ain't got no bullets left. Go check it out pal, it's free. Yeehaw! This message convinced me to have a quick play of Fistful of Frags the other day. It was pretty fun. There was nobody else playing, but the multiplayer servers have bots, so I played with those. Not a bad game. I might even play it again. Look for a video about it soon. And with that, this week's Ask a Herbert Erpaderp draws to a close. Just a reminder to any patrons that might not have seen it, there's a poll over at Patreon where you can vote on which Battlefront plastic kit you would like to see me build first, either the Tigers or the M10s. Right now they're tied. I don't want to have to flip a coin to decide. Of course, if you're not already a patron and you want to vote too, there's a link to Patreon in the description and in the end card. In addition to taking part in polls, patrons get to see my videos a little earlier than everybody else, and there's some bonus patron-only content too. The January outtakes video is going to be up in the next couple of days. If you have any questions you would like me to answer in next week's Ask a Herbert Erpaderp, or if you just have any general comments, go ahead and put them in the comments section below. Also, be sure to do those other YouTubey things like subscribing, sharing, and clicking like, assuming you did like the video. If you really like the videos I make, check out Patreon, which I just spoke about. If you've forgotten that already, skip back a few seconds. As always, I shall return soon. Until then, happy whatever it is you're doing, and thanks for watching. Farewell.